Hey dev team, welcome back to Flutter with Drag. Okay, this episode I want to look at our login screen and actually get it so people can log in. We've already done the code to work with our repository to do that, and now we're going to continue this. So I'm going to start in the screens folder, and I'm going to make a new folder called sign in, because we haven't got, at the moment our sign in page is just a file. So new folder, sign in, and I'm just going to drag the sign in to the sign in folder. And although this doesn't show up on the video, we're just saying a little pop-up message saying Dart wants to refactor, and I'm going to click OK. With a bit of luck, that will have already updated our barrel file, so we're good to go there. Right. Now we're going to need a block in here to manage the actual state of the sign-in screen. So in the sign-in folder, right click, block, new block, and we're going to call this sign in. And that's that. So let's go through this and set up the various different parts of this block that we're going to need. Let's start with the state. Okay, so initially we're going to have a sign-in state, which isn't going to be an abstract class. It's just going to be the one class. And we're going to have a few little bits of information that we want to store. So we're going to want an email address, because we need the email address to log in. And we're going to want a password as a string as well. We're also going to want some way of knowing whether the email and password are valid. So I'm going to do a boolean for that, just called email valid, and copy that, password valid. And then finally we need something to have the status of the whole form, such as, is it being submitted, have we got an error, so on and so forth. Now we could do this as an enum, but I'm not going to, because for one of the states, when there's an error, I want to hold some information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the bottom of this file, and I'm going to create another abstract class called form status. That will have a const constructor, like so. Okay, so in here we're going to have an initial form status, which is going to extend form status. And because I'm going to use this in a constant constructor later on, this also needs a constant constructor, initial form status. So then we're going to have a class called form submitting, which extends form status. And no prizes for guessing, that's when the form is being submitted. Then we're going to have a class called form success. That's for when the form has been successfully submitted. And finally, the one that's going to have the error message is going to be a form error. Extends form status. And that's going to have a string message, which will be the error message we display to the user. So we're going to need to get a constructor for that, which has this message. Okay, so now we have those. Up here, I can have a final form status, which we'll call form status. Wonderful. So now we can create our constructor. So we can do that however we want to do that. I'm going to wrap that with some curly braces. And by default, we're going to not require anything, but we are going to set the email to blank. we're going to set the password to blank. We're going to set the valid email to false. Same with the password, because when we initially come and nothing's been typed in, we haven't got a valid username and password. And finally, we're going to set the initial form status to initial form status. Okay. Next, we're going to need a copy with for this. So again, I'm going to use a refactoring tool. It's plugged in, generate copy with. I'm just going to delete the props for now. We'll put that in a second. And again, all of it needs to be copyable. So you can either type it out, and this is all optional. So if we call copy with and we miss anything out, it'll just take the default or take the current value. Otherwise, it'll copy it. Okay, so that's that. I'm also going to, in fact, I'll do it up near the top. I'm also going to create a getter, which is just going to test whether the whole form is valid. And that's going to be called form valid. And that's simply going to be the email valid and password valid. So the form is only going to be considered valid when the email is valid and our password is valid. Finally, to stop you all complaining, we need to override the props. And we need to override that with all of the statuses, all of the properties. So that's email, password, email valid, password valid, and form status. Okay, I think that's it. Next, we can get rid of this class here, this initial, sign in initial. We don't need that. And that is our sign in state done. So let's move now to our sign in events. And we're going to have some of these. We're going to have sign in email changed, which extends our sign in event. And that is going to take a final string email. We need a constructor for that, so const sign in email changed this email, and override the props for that email. We're going to want the same thing for password, so I'm just going to copy the whole thing and paste it. And then by double clicking on our sign in email changed and hitting Control D, it will select our two instances of that. And I'm just going to come into sign in password word changed. I've just realized I'm mixing my cases up here. So if I come back to our sign in email, I'm just going to put that into lowercase I, just to keep it consistent. That obviously takes a password, so I'm just going to double click on the first email, Control D to select the second one, Control D for the third one, and just type in password. And the final event then is going to be sign in, again, sign in form submitted, and that extends sign in event, and that takes no properties. Okay, so that's our sign in event. How about our block? Well, the block is going to need access to our auth repository. So the first thing I'm going to put up here is a final authentication repository. And then when we construct our sign-in block, we need to pass that in. So we're going to take in an authentication repository called authentication repository. Then in our initializer, we will set our private authentication repository to equal the one we've just sent in. Okay. Super is going to be our initial state, and that's just going to be our sign-in state. And it's going to be a const, of course. And I'm going to delete that. There, so that's everything set up. Now we just need to watch our events. So we've got three. We have on sign in email changed. We're going to do email changed. Copy that down. Second one is going to be on sign in password changed. We're going to do password changed. And the third one is going to be on sign in form submitted. We'll just call this login. Okay, so we'll just create all those by refactoring and going to create method. There's 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm just going to reorder those. Actually, I should have done them in a slightly different. Right, so what happens on each of these? Well, let's start with our email changed. So when they pass in the email, we're first going to want to validate it. So let's just get a copy of the email first of all. And so final string email equals event email. And then we will do our validation. For now, we're just going to do a really simple validation. We'll look at making it more complex later on. But we're going to say it's valid if the email.length is greater than 4. Okay, it's not a very good validation for an email, but we'll do more there later on. And then we're going to emit our current state, copy with email, in the new email, and the email valid is valid. And that's it. Password is going to be identical pretty much. I'm just going to copy that and paste that in on password changed. So here we haven't got an email, but we've got a password, and it will be valid if the password is greater than, and well, we'll go with 8 because we know Firestore requires at least 8. Firebase requires 8. And then the copy with, we're going to update the password with the password, and the password valid with the valid. And that's that. Finally, for our login, we're going to first of all change the state to submitting so that we can display, I don't know, a circular progress indicator or something to show that something's happening. So immediately we're going to emit the state copy with form status form submitting. We're then going to await our authentication repository, except this needs to now be an async function. So we're going to await our authentication repository, log in with email and password, and we're going to pass in the email and the password. The email is going to be state.email, and the password is going to be state.password, just like that. Now, if you remember when we did our login and repository, we set up a way that it throws a message with an error message if this fails. So we want to capture that. To do that, we're going to wrap this in a try catch, and we're going to say on login email and password failure, catch the error. And if we have that, we're going to emit state copy with form status form error, and then we're going to pass in the error message which we're going to get out of our error. Now if there isn't an error, it should log us in. We shouldn't need to do anything else because the block should take us away from this page and it should all close down. But to be on the safe side, what we will also do is here we will just emit, I can't spell emit, state copy with form status form success. Okay, and that will finish that off. That really should never happen, or happen so quickly we never really see it, because as soon as we've logged in, our other block should take care of navigating us away from this page anyway. Okay, that's our block sorted. Okay, with that done, we just have to do the page itself. So first things first, I have moved a file into an assets directory I've created, and this is just a picture that I got off Unsplash, which I'm going to be using as the background to our sign-in page. So with a thing, with an image in the assets folder, we're going to need to come to our pubspec.yaml and come down to the assets bit and uncomment it. And here I'm just going to put in assets / which will load everything in the assets directory. At the moment we've just got the one image, and we'll save that. Give that a second to reload. Okay, so I'm going to close that down and the block, and let's start our sign-in screen. At the moment we've got a scaffold with a center and a text button on it. All of that's going to come out, but let's start by wrapping this scaffold with a block provider, because we need to provide the sign-in block that we've just created. So let's put that in there and import it. And of course that's going to need our authentication repository. So we can get that with a context.read, just like that. Now if you want to be super explicit about it, you can also type it to authentication repository. Doesn't matter whether that's there or not because it's properly typed anyway. Okay, so we have our scaffold. Well, what do we want? We don't want this center anymore, so I'm just going to delete the center, and we're going to have instead a stack. And a stack has children. And if you remember, a stack is just a stack of widgets on top of each other. And we're going to start with the background. So the background is very simply going to be a container. And the container is going to have a decoration, and that is going to have a box decoration. In the box decoration we're going to have an image, and it's going to be of type decoration image, and the image is going to be assets image, and then the assets. So the asset is assets sign in background.jpg. I think I spelled it right. Let's just save that and put some commas in so it all formats. Okay, let's refresh that. And there we have our image. Okay, but we want it to fit across the whole of the screen, so we're going to add in a fit box fit cover, and that will expand it to fit the whole screen. And that's it for our background. Now, so we don't get confused, I'm going to extract that out to its own method, which we're going to call underscore background. Okay, and that's just put that down below and given us a bit of a cleaner working area to work on here. Next thing I want is a title. So again, the title is going to be in a container, but I'm going to want to move it around the screen. I don't want it at the top. So I'm going to wrap it first of all in a positioned. I need a comma after the background, of course. Okay, so the child is going to be a container. And the container is going to have a decoration, box decoration. And for now, we'll just put in a color, and we'll put colors dot white. Okay, now as you can see, that's now taken up the entirety of the screen, which isn't quite what we want. But we'll worry about that in a moment. Within the container, we're going to want a child, and the child is going to be not a sign-in screen. The child is going to be a column because we want a couple of things in here. The column itself is going to have some children, and the first thing we're going to have is some text, and that's going to be the name of the conference, GlobalCon. Okay. I'm going to copy that because the next I want is the date, and our fictional conference is happening in 2023, I think we said. Doesn't really matter. And I'm also going to have a little bit of text which just says that this is the participants guide. Like so. Okay. So that's sort of shrunk that down a little bit. Now it's taking up the right room. So let's position it a little bit. And in our position, we're going to say from the top, I want that to be 100 down, and from the left, 50, and from the right, 50. Let's save that. And there we are. We've got something now that's looking a little bit better. Right. Let's do a bit of formatting with our text. So our first one, global conf, needs to set a style. Well, we've already set styles, so I'm going to see if we can use some of those. So it's going to be an app font headline 1. Let's see what that looks like. Yep, that's okay. For the date, I think what we will do is the same, actually. We're going to have a style of app fonts headline 1, but I'm going to copy with and change the color to app colors orange, like so. And we now got to, because the const is now in the wrong place, so we just need to take that out and pop that in. And then for the participants guide, we're going to set the style to be app font subtitle. Okay, that will do. I'm happy with that. Next, I'm going to set the border radius of this. So on the container, let me think about this. You know, I'm not going to set the radius just yet. I'll come back to that. What I do want to do though is I want to make this white background slightly transparent. I want to be able to see through that. So I'm going to put in the color where we have the color for that box. I'm going to put with alpha 200, And again, that's now messed up the const, so I need to take that out. Save that. Okay. Now it'd also be rather cool, I think, to blur that background in there, so it's not quite as sharp. But to do that, I know I'm going to want to do this in two places, because I'm also going to want to do this with the login box. So I'm actually going to create a new widget, which I'm going to call blur background. So I'm going to take our container and I'm going to wrap that with a widget called blur background. But we need to create that widget. So calming right down outside our current, we're going to create a new stateless widget called blur background. Okay. Now in the background, we are going to want to have a child. So final widget. Oh my gosh, not spelling today. And that's going to be required. So required this dot child. And we can just return that straight away. So at the moment, that's not doing anything, but it should work. Okay. So this effectively is our container now with our global con in it. Well, to blur it, we can wrap that with another widget called backdrop filter. We don't want to return a widget, we want to return a backdrop filter. It didn't wrap properly, never mind. Should look like that. Now the backdrop filter requires a filter, and the filter I'm going to use is an image filter dot blur. Let's just get all these commas and everything in the right place. Okay, so we're returning, there we are, eventually, we're returning an image filter dot blur, and in the blur we can put a sigma x and a sigma y. And if we look now at our app, that has blurred the entire background. But that's not what I want. I only want it to blur behind this. So I'm going to wrap the whole backdrop filter, I'm going to wrap that with another widget, and that widget is going to be clip r rect. And when I save that, you can see it's now come back and it has blurred just behind the one part. The border radius circular 15. And in fact, anywhere where we use this blur background, we'll need to have the circular 15 radius for it to work. If we wanted to have it so that you could have any radius, we then have to pass that in as a property, but we don't need to do that because I'm only using it twice and they're both going to be 15, so that's fine. Okay, so that's our positioned, and I'm going to extract that in exactly the same way that I've just done, and I'm going to call this title. And now we've got our title. Next, we're actually going to want to have our login form. Okay, so here within our login form, again, we're going to have a positioned because we're going to need to move it around. And again, the child is going to be a container. Let's just get this right. And the background for this is going to be our primary color. So let's put in a decoration, box decoration, color, app colors, primary. Okay, and again, it's filled our entire screen, but as we saw a minute ago, that will sort itself out in a minute. Right, within our child, we're going to have within our container, we're going to have a form. So let's put in a form, and the form is going to have a column. column is going to have children, and in here we're going to have the various different fields that we need to log in. So let's start with an email field. So here we're going to have a text form field, and we're going to have to take the const out of there to make that work. So there we are, we've got a text form field ready to go, but it's very difficult for a user to understand what they're trying to do there, so we need to sort that out. So within our text form field we're going to have a decoration, and that's going to be an input decoration, and we're going to have a label which is going to be text which says email. I'll put a constant for us. So there we are, we're starting to get there. We've got an email, and as you can see it shrinks up. Well, we'll position that. Let's position it now to see if we can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to position this to be bottom 100, left 20, right 20. There we are, that's a little bit better. Okay, and I think while we're here we'll probably put in some padding. So within our container we'll put in some padding. Const edge inset symmetric. I think it's going to need to be different. We're going to have vertical of 10, horizontal of 20. There we go, and that's that moves it around nicely. Right, back to our email field. What else do we want here? Well, I think we can put in here an icon, and so I'm going to put in here an icon of email. That should be all right. Let's format some of this. Let's set the icon color to colors.white. Let's set some hint text as well to email address you registered with. Okay, so that will give us, when the user clicks in the email box, that'll give them some instructions there to make sure that they're going to type in the right thing. I think we need to do a lot now with the colors because this isn't good. So let's start with various different borders. So first of all, enabled border, and so this is going to be an underline input border, and the border side is going to be a border side color colors.white. Okay, how does that look? There we go, we've got a white line there. Just going to put some commas in. So that's our enabled border. If we've clicked on it and we've focused on it, I'm going to copy that. That's going to be our focused border. And in that case, we're also going to have, I think, a width of 2. Just give it a bit of a line there like that. We're going to have to set a hint style, which is the style for the hint text, to be text style colors.white. Let's see how we're looking now. We're going to have to do a refresh again for some of this. Yep, that's looking okay. With the label, we're going to have to set the text color for that. So style, text style, color, colors dot white, and the icon, I thought the icon color should have changed there, but it's not, so we're going to set the color for the icon to be colors dot white. Okay, that's all good. I'm just going to do one more refresh, and that's fine. So I'm going to take that text form field, I'm going to extract that to its own method called email field. Okay. I'm going to take that email field and I'm going to copy it and paste it, and that's going to become password field. And for that, the text is going to be password. The icon is going to be a lock, and we don't need any hint text, so I'm going to take the hint text out of there. And then coming up here to our email field, I'm just going to put in our password field. Okay, now you can possibly start to see a little problem we're having, but I'm going to keep going for now and we'll come back and solve this problem in a moment. Finally, we're going to want a sign in button, and for that we're going to have an elevated button which will have an on pressed, which will do something. What we don't know yet, not there. And the child is just going to be the text, const text, sign in. Okay. I want the sign in button to be a slightly different color. So in our sign in button, I'm going to put our style to be elevated button dot style from, and we're going to set the primary of this to be colors dot white, and the on primary to be app colors dot primary. There we are, and that will give us a white button with sign in text. Okay, so can you see the deliberate error here? Problem is now when we try and sign in, this keyboard appears, and because we've set this box to be 100 pixels from the bottom, it is 100 pixels from the bottom because the screen has shrunk. So we need some way of dealing with that. I mean, we could leave it like that, it works, it just doesn't look fantastic. So the way we're going to deal with this is in our scaffold, just before our stack, I'm going to wrap this with a layout builder. Now, a layout builder doesn't take a child, it takes a builder. And the builder has a context and constraints. In fact, there it is. And now it's put way too many of those in for us. Right, context and constraints. And we're going to return our stack. Except, before we return the stack, we want to actually do a calculation. So I'm going to change this to be a block body. And before we return the stack, I'm just going to set a boolean called shrink equals constraints dot max height less than 500. So if the maximum height of our screen is less than 500, shrink is going to be true. And I'm going to pass that down here, and we're going to say with the positioned, if we have shrink, it's going to be 10 from the bottom, otherwise 100. I'm also going to pass shrink to the title. So the title now is going to take a bool shrink, if shrink 50, otherwise 100. Okay, let's save that. And now look at that. When we get a keyboard, things move and position in different places. However, I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to say that in our title, that if we're shrinking, I'm not going to have the date or the text either. So after the text for global con, I'm going to say if not shrink, then we're also going to have those two bits, otherwise we're not. And that gives us even more room should we need it, or if the screen's even smaller. So when we don't have a keyboard, we have our full screen. I think we need to put some padding and stuff in here. But when we do have our keyboard, it all shrinks up out of our way. Let's come to our title. Let's put a bit of padding in there. I think that's probably called for. So in our container, I'm just going to put padding const edge inset all 20. I think that looks a bit better with and without the keyboard. Finally, I want to put this blur and slight alpha on this down here. But before we do that, let's come to our positioned and let's extract this to a method, and we will call this one form, and it's taken the shrink for us. Okay, so we're going to wrap the container with our blurred background, and that has done that. Of course, we can't see a blurred background. To get the blurred background, we're also going to need to put a with alpha on here, and let's go with 200. Let's see what that looks like. Need to get rid of that const now. Yeah, I think that looks all right. So there we go. We have our form. Now, our form doesn't yet do anything. That's the next step. So let's extract this elevated button like we've done before. We're going to extract the method, and we'll call this login button. Okay, so let's start with the email field, and first of all we're going to want to wrap this with now a block builder, and the block builder is obviously the sign-in block. Now we've got a lot of red here because we're saying that we're returning a text form field, and we're not anymore. We're now returning a block builder. So we'll just change this here to be a bit more generic and say we're returning a widget, and that solves that. Okay, so in here we have a state. Now this is something we only want to be looking at when the email address changes. We don't want this field to be rebuilding when someone types in a password, for example. So here we're going to use the build when, and that gives us a previous and a current version of the state. And we're just going to say where previous dot password is not equal to current email, sorry, not password, email. This is the email field. Okay, so that's when we're going to build. So if the state has changed and the email is different, we're going to rebuild this. Okay, well, how does it change? Well, we're going to have to call it, make it change. So on the form, when it changes, we get a value. And here we can say context.read. Okay, now here we do have to say what we're reading, and it's going to be the sign-in block. And we're going to add an event, and the event we're going to add is sign in email changed, and we're going to pass the value that has been changed. Okay, next we need to know whether this form field is valid or not, and again we can do that with a validator that has itself a value which returns state email valid. If it is, we return nothing. If it isn't valid, we can say check email address. Okay, let's save that. Now let's do a refresh because we've messed around with some state here. And let's come to our email and start typing an email address. We can now see that the email address is in a bad color. This gets called when we check to see whether the form is valid. And we do that within our submit button. Now to do that, we need to have access to the whole form. So to deal with that, let's come right up to the top of our sign-in screen. And much like we did with the navigator in a previous episode, we're going to make a global key. So I'm going to have a final form key equals global key, and the key, we need to give it a state, and it's going to be form state. Okay, now that means this can't be a const anymore, so we'll just take that out. And that's good. So coming down to our form, where we actually have our form, which is here, we can then specify the key for that form is going to be the form key. Okay, then coming to the login button in the on pressed, we can say form key dot current state dot validate, and it's going to complain that it might not exist, but we know we've set it up, so we will put our null operator there to say we know about that. So what happens when we press this button now is that the form is going to look at all the child form elements, so the child text form fields in it, and see whether it is valid or not. If it is valid, then it will show us this, the validator will be checked, and if it's valid, if we've already determined it's valid, then we will return nothing. Otherwise, we're going to return this error message. So let's save that and put in a incorrect email address and click our button. I think we might have to do a hot restart here. We do need to do a hot restart. We also need to go and change our main.dart because we had a const and now it's no longer a const. So let's just take that out, save that, make sure it does restart without errors, and then we'll try that again. Okay, so we'll put in a fake email address and click our sign in, and now we have our warning and our error message. Fantastic. Coming back to our file, let's go back to our email field. We do need to change the style of the text to make sure it is white. So in our text form field, before the declaration, let's put style, text style, color, colors.white. That will const it up. So that should now allow us to put in, a white text. So if we do put in a valid email. And don't forget, at the moment our validator is just saying if it's over 4 characters or whatever. That's now considered valid. When we click sign in, we get no error message. Okay, having done that, I'm just going to copy that style line, because we're going to come down to our text field for the password and just pop that in as well. So our password also is in white. And again, we're going to wrap this text form field now in a block builder. Again, we're going to change this to widget. Let's try that again, because we're now returning a widget. And our subject block is our sign in block and sign in state. Again, we're going to do the build when, and we're going to get a previous and current, and this time when the previous password is not equal to the current password, we're going to rebuild. So we need to add our validate and on change now. So on change, we're going to take a value and we're going to call context.read. Reading what? Well, it's our sign in block. We're going to add an event, and the event is going to be sign in password changed, and we'll pass the value. And then the validator is going to be, it's going to take a value, and we're going to say here if state.password is valid. If that's the case, we're going to return null. Otherwise, we're going to just return an error, and we'll just say check password. Okay, so let's try that. Our password has to be 8 characters, so let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and click sign in. And now we get the error message, check password. Put a couple more characters in there, sign in, and the error message goes. Okay, the next thing I want to change quickly is we don't particularly want to see our password. So within our text form field here, we're going to take obscured text and set that to true. And that will hide our password as we're typing it in, and that's as we expect. We can also, if we focus on the email address, getting to the @ key is tricky. That's not tricky, but it's not easy. We can fix that though, because within the text form field, we can say keyboard type, and that's going to be input type, and for that we'll have email address. Copy that, and then for the password, we'll say the keyboard type, whoops, wrong place, in the text form field is going to be visible password. Okay, so now when we click on this, we've got a keyboard layout which is suitable for email addresses. We can easily access the period key, we can easily access the @ key, and when we flip to the password, we've got typical keys for passwords. All right, that is that. Now all we have to do is get our form to actually submit. Let's find the button. Okay, so when we press, we want to do something else. So what do we want to happen? Well, this here returns a Boolean if the form is valid. And so we can wrap that in an if, and we can say if the form is valid, then we're going to do something. Otherwise, we're not going to do anything, and the error messages will just show. What do we want to do? Well, we want to do context read of the sign in block, and we're going to add an event. The event is going to be sign in form submitted. Now we haven't got a context here. We could pass it in, which is why we've got a red squiggly line here. But we also want to change the button, and we only want it to show when the form is submitting or not submitting. When it is submitting, we want to have a circular progress indicator. So I'm going to wrap this again with a block builder for the sign-in block. And again, it's no longer returning an elevated button, so we're going to change that to widget. And now that does provide us with a context, so the context is fine here. So what we're going to say here though is return, and we're going to say state form status is form submitting. So if we're submitting the form, then we're going to return a circular progress indicator. Otherwise, if we're not submitting the form, we're going to return an elevated button, and that's going to want a const there like that. Okay, so let's save that, and that should all work. So let's try logging in with an account that doesn't exist. So let's say, well, I'll use my email, drygethere.com, I think is the one I used for this one. And I know the password was password 123. So let's just do password 567. And if I click sign in, nothing happens. Okay, well, something has happened. We've probably got an error message back from Firebase saying that the password is invalid, but we're not displaying that to the user. So where are we going to do that? Well, I think we're going to do it in our login form, and I'm going to take the positioned and I'm going to wrap this with a block listener for the sign-in block. And again, I'm going to have to change this now to a widget. Okay, so a block listener listens for changes in the state and reacts. We've used that before when we navigate from our login page. And so what we can do is, first of all, we can say we're only going to listen to this when the previous .form status is not equal to the current form status, and the form status, the current form status, is form error, because we only want this to fire. There we go. We only want this to fire if we've got an error, because what we're going to do is we're going to display a snack bar here. So let's get the final form status there. So final form status equals state form status. And that will allow us to say if form status is form error, then we're going to do something. And I don't know why I've put brackets there, that's totally not needed. Now, why are we doing this? Because it should be form error, because we've already said that. Well, it's just so that we can access the correct state here. So it's cast the form status properly for us here. Scaffold messenger of context show snack bar. Snack bar is going to have content, and the content is going to be the text form status dot message. Okay, so if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't be able to access this message bit. Let's put some commas in there, move it on to multiple lines, and let's change the background color of this to colors.red, because, you know, it's a big error message. Okay, let's save that. We're going to have to do a hot restart because we're loading in states here. But now if we try to put in our email address and the incorrect password and sign in, we get told the email address is not registered. Okay, so I'm guessing in that case it's test.com is the one I used. Sign in, and now we're told we've got an incorrect password. Put in the correct password, and we're into the app. Fantastic. That is our login page done. So folks, I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, it does help me out. And we'll continue with the further development of this in the next episode. Till then, take care, we'll see you then. Bye now.